Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Meg Whitaker. I'm excited to introduce you to the Winter 2021 webinar titled EU's Chemical Strategy for Sustainability Towards a Toxic-Free Environment. I'm super excited. Besides this being our 7th quarterly webinar, this is our first webinar that we're jointly holding with the Society of Toxicology's Sustainable Chemicals for Contemporary Toxicology Specialty Section. I'm lucky enough to be the Vice President-elect of the SCCT, and I'm also the program co-chair for the A4 Program Committee. Next slide, please. So today is an interesting webinar, and I was very excited when we came up with this idea because the EU has been busy, very, very busy, putting together a sustainability strategy for a toxic-free environment. As I read through the October report that we're going to hear about today, I looked at their goals and I was amazed. By 2050, the EU wants to get to a climate neutral, and they want to get to a fully circular economy. And then secondly, they want to move towards a toxic-free economy. Those are really big goals. And we're going to learn about how they're going to do this today. We're going to find out the origins of the strategy. We're going to find out what's unique in terms of advancing a holistic chemicals management strategy so that we get to that circular economy all want to get to. We want to find out what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and then find out how many of us who are green chemists or toxicologists or alternatives assessors can contribute to making that happen. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Joel Tickner, who's our A4 director, and Pam Spencer, who's the president of A4 and also the vice president of the SOT SCCT. We're going to hear from them so we can learn about, well, how do we really make this happen in America and North America as well? Pam, I'm going to turn it over now to go to the next slide. Pam's going to introduce our speaker today, I believe, or is it Joel?
It's actually Joel.
I'm going to disappear.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Meg. And let me just say, as someone who has worked on chemicals policy for 25 years at the state, national, and international level, this is big, it's bold, it's integrated, it brings together not just chemicals, but sustainability, circularity, climate change. So it's an exciting time and a lot to learn from. And I don't envy our speaker's job moving forward because it is so large and complex and challenging to integrate research, regulation, policy support. So we're going to hear a little bit about what's going on in Europe with the chemical strategy for sustainability. So we've worked closely, my colleague Molly Jacobs, who's behind the scenes on the webinar today, who put it together, and myself with Elena Montani from the European Commission. She's in the chemicals unit at DG Environment, where she's leading the DG Environment work on implementing the chemical strategy for sustainability, but she's worked with the European Commission for many years, since 2007. And before that, she was a contact person. She was a representative for Italy in the European Commission. And she has a background in political science and European politics and has the challenging and I don't know whether enviable position of trying to make this strategy work in practice. So I want to welcome Elena, and I'm going to give you a little bit of logistics for the webinar today. And then at the end, Pam and I will lead some discussion. But because we have so many people on the webinar, we had 250 people registered, which indicates the extensive interest in what's happening on the other side of the pond. All lines will be muted. As you have questions, write them in the question and answer box, and we will answer them later. The webinar is being recorded. It'll be posted on our A4 website, saferalternatives.org, and we'll have an evaluation at the end. Also, if you have a question you want to articulate it verbally, please use the mechanism to raise your hand in the control panel on your screen, and we will unmute you and let you weigh in. So we're going to start with a little poll here about the strategy. So Molly, if you can throw up the poll, that would be great. Very simple poll, so please put your answer in there, and let's see what we get from participants. So good, a fair number of people have heard about the chemical strategy and some haven't. So hopefully we'll get into depth here and see what it means for all of us in the alternatives assessment and the toxicology communities. So with that, I'm going to pass control to Elena, and thank you so much for joining us at the end of your workday in Brussels.
Thanks, Joel, and indeed it's an honor to be here, and indeed it's the end of my workday, so bear with me if maybe I'm not as smart as I should be in a conference of this level, but it's indeed really an honor to present what we have done and what we have adopted a few months ago. So what I will tell you today is a little bit of history, background, and vision on what is the EU chemical strategy for sustainability. So let's see if I manage to move the slides. Yes, very happy. So first of all, chemicals and why we needed a chemical strategy. So most of these things are something that I don't need to teach you in any way, because you know much more than me. But we start in the chemical strategy by recognizing the importance of chemicals for the economy and for society. And Europe is the second largest producer of chemicals. So the chemicals industry is a very important asset for the European economy and society. It also employs 1.2 million people. And chemicals are not only important in terms of economy and society for the chemicals industry, but also because they are used for the manufacture of basically everything we produce. So they have a very important role in the whole value chain. This is also reflected in terms of global numbers, where the chemicals production is actually expected to double by 2030. Most of it will happen in other countries, in China especially, and this is something that we know is going very fast, and that we need to tackle as soon as possible. And we need to address this because chemicals are not only a benefit for society, and that we have more and more benefits in terms also of the technologies needed to, in particular, to produce climate neutral technologies. But as you well know, they are still harming severely the people and the environment. And we have raising concerns not only from science, which is alerting on a number of emerging issues that we need to address. In particular, I can mention endocrine disruptors, persistent substances, or chemical mixtures. But we have also a number of alerts from citizens, and this was mirrored in the latest surveys that we did Europe-wide, where 84% of citizens are concerned about the impact of chemicals on the health, and 90% of citizens are concerned about the impact of chemicals on the environment. So this is why this is the background for the chemical strategy for sustainability, which was announced in the European Green Deal. Now I see that almost half of you have never heard about the chemical strategy. I think that probably a little bit more have heard about the European Green Deal. This is actually the Europe's vision for making our society a sustainable economy and society. So, and it's a very holistic vision, as was said a little bit earlier. There are a number of very ambitious objectives in terms of climate neutrality, of circular economy, but also of zero pollution. So we have announced that we will try to move towards a zero pollution ambition for a toxic-free environment. And this is where the chemical strategy is mostly concerned. So the chemical strategy is the first deliverable under this pillar, the zero pollution. And the second pillar of the zero pollution ambition will come in a few months with a zero pollution action plan to tackle in particular air, water and soil pollution. So to look more at the downside of the story. But the chemical strategy is very much linked to also the other pillars of the Green Deal because of the cross-cutting nature of chemicals and the uses that we're doing of chemicals, especially as I already mentioned for the climate neutrality objectives, but also because the chemicals industry is a very polluting industry. So not only in terms of climate impact, but also in terms of other pollution, and also for the link to the circular economy, which means that we want to achieve a system where materials and products are reused and recycled as much as possible. And chemicals are very important component because we need to make sure that we have clean circularity and not only circularity. So as you can see, the chemical strategy is very encompassing for the Green Deal, and that's why we have tried really to move towards our holistic picture also in the chemical strategy. Now, if I manage to move to the next slide here. The European legal framework on chemicals is actually very advanced already. So it's not that we are starting from scratch. We have a lot of legislation. It started in the 60s with the first piece of legislation on the hazardous chemicals in waste. And it built along these 50 years in different directions, but always in a very comprehensive and complex framework as a whole. So we have chemicals legislation which deals directly with products, so chemicals in products. We have legislation on toys, on cosmetics. We have specific legislation on chemicals in waste, legislation in chemicals on the environment, and then the let's say the revolution in terms of chemicals legislation in Europe was launched almost 20 years ago when we had a white paper which basically built the way for the two horizontal pieces of legislation that we have in Europe, which are the cornerstones of the chemicals legislation, and those are REACH and CLP, and those regulate the way we classify chemical substances. So this is mostly CLP, especially where we classify the hazards, and REACH is the way is the regulation which regulates chemical substances placed on the market. So it requires that substances are registered and evaluated before being placed on the market. So we have evaluated extensively this legislation in the past years, and we have gathered a lot of information on what were actually our success stories, but also what were the gaps. And we had a clear view of what we needed to fit in order to consolidate chemicals legislation. So the strategy doesn't want to rebuild or demolish what we have, but we really want to consolidate what we have achieved in all those years and to build from that and build it further. We also had a lot of pressure from the Council and the European Parliament on trying to have a strategic vision on chemicals, and this is why And now I move to the next slide. This is why we really tried in the strategy to give a long-term vision. So you will recognize in 2030, most probably, the target date for the Sustainable Development Goals, which are already an international commitments and which actually commit also on chemicals, because they have a specific target on sound management of chemicals and waste internationally. We knew that we needed to align to policy priorities like the Sustainable Development Goals and to other policy priorities set in other policy goals. And this is why our vision is up to and beyond 2030, where we really want to move towards a toxic-free environment. Obviously, for the moment is towards, and we have been also criticized for the word toxic-free, but we are we were very keen in having this commitment in the strategy because it really gives the overall ambition. And what we are trying to do here, and this is why we have this image of what we call a reversed pyramid, is try to invert the logic which has been at the beginning of environmental policies in Europe up to now. Environmental policies have been born to basically eliminate and remediate pollution on the ground. Here we really want to move towards a system which is preventive at source, so that moving towards chemicals which are safe and sustainable from the start and along their entire life cycle. We are well aware that we will always need to minimize and control the risks of chemicals in the economy and society, because we will always need chemicals which are hazardous to health and environment, and even very toxic chemicals may be needed for society. But we need to, and this is the orange part, we need to minimize and control this risk as much as possible. So this overall vision is calling for Europe to move towards safe and sustainable chemicals, but also try to make this target a global standard, so not only a EU market norm. Just one second for the next slide. And those are the 5 pillars of what we have announced in the chemical strategy. So first of all, we are well aware that if we want to move towards this vision, we really need a lot of innovation. We need to support industry and to support the competitiveness of industry. And this effort will need obviously to match with our support to the recovery of the economy and society, and to a green recovery. As you may know, the European Union has now launched a big recovery plan, which is in line with the European Green Deal objectives. So we really want to use the opportunity to put the 2 efforts together and really to build towards, to build together for a sustainable economy and society. The second pillar is to strengthen legislation. So as I said, we have a very strong legislation already, very advanced, but there are a number of urgent gaps, and we need to strengthen this legislation in order to move to better protection. The third is simplification of our legislation and regulatory processes, but especially of our assessment of chemicals, and also coherence on the way we do assessment of chemicals. The fourth is to build a stronger knowledge base on chemicals, and also to strengthen the scientific, the link with the science, so the science policy interface. And the fifth is the global ambition. So we would like the ambition which is announced in the chemical strategy also to become a global ambition, or at least we would like the EU to move and to promote as much as possible this ambition globally. So here I will go a little bit deeper in these 5 pillars. And the first, as I said, is to boost innovation. And the key concept for the strategy is that of safe and sustainable by design chemicals. So we want really to move towards, as I said, to a system which is safe and sustainable by the beginning of the process. Here we have discussed a lot also about terminology. Yeah? So you may ask us how we got there, but I know you are into sustainable chemistry. We have discussed whether to use the word green chemistry, sustainable chemistry. We were building, I can say maybe a little bit more later if there is an interest, but so this is the terminology that we use, and we are well aware that there is not an EU agreed concept about those wording. So the first action that we will do is actually to develop safe and sustainable by design criteria, and also to create a EU-wide support network in order to support from a technological and also financial point of view. We will provide funding in line with what we will develop, and the funding will go first of all for the safe and sustainable by design, not only substances but materials and products. And here obviously the line is very thin. What is substances, safe by design substances, and what is safe by design materials and products? So our approach will most probably be all encompassing. We also want to provide funding to support the transition of the chemical industry towards a greener and also more digital production of chemicals. We will support access to risk finance, and in particular for SMEs and startups. And we will also promote interregional collaboration along the sustainable chemicals value chain. Another key concept in the strategy is that of non-toxic material cycles. As I already said, that this is very much in line with our circular economy objectives. So we want materials and products to be reused, but we need to make sure that these material cycles are non-toxic, are clean cycles. So we need to promote those, and we also need decontamination solutions, because materials and products which are already on the market still have a lot of legacy problems with chemicals, which have in the meantime been banned from the market. And the last but not least aspect of the innovation part of the strategy is the open strategic autonomy, which was also kind of raised to our attention by the COVID-19 crisis. So we are well aware that Europe is dependent on chemicals which are also produced outside Europe, and we are very well aware that we have some chemicals which are very critical for our economy and society in Europe, and we need those chemicals, and not only for the health of our people and thinking about products which helped in the cases of the COVID-19 crisis, but also for technology solutions that Europe is planning to promote, in particular for climate neutrality. Next pillar is, slides are not moving, try again, is the strengthening of the legislation. So this is the action, those are the actions which are basically the most ambitious in terms of raising protection of health and the environment. And here we have, let's say, 3 levels. We have actions to make sure that all chemicals on the market are used safely and sustainably, and we have a number of actions in this sense to increase the sustainability of those chemicals. We have actions to substitute and minimize as far as possible what we call substances of concern, which is basically all the substances which have a chronic effect on health and environment. This is the definition that we provide in the strategy. And the third layer is to avoid, as far as possible, the most harmful chemicals in consumer products, especially for vulnerable groups, but not only. And those actions are focused especially on the most pressing chemicals and the most pressing issues. The first one is endocrine disruptors, which is considered is one of those announced most harmful chemicals that we will phase out in consumer products. And the second are persistent substances, and in particular PFAS. And for PFAS, we have announced actually a lot of actions, basically an action plan, where the basic objective is to phase out the non-essential uses of PFAS in Europe, but also to promote the contamination as much as possible, because as we know, Europe is already contaminated severely, especially in and also in drinking water in some regions where this is very strong. We have a number of actions announced to tackle mixtures of chemicals. So we are one of the finding of our evaluations was that our legislation is advanced when it regards substance by substance assessment and regulation, but is very behind for what it regards chemical mixtures. So the most ambitious action that we have announced on mixtures is that we will introduce under the REACH regulation a mixture assessment factor in order to take into account of the multitude of a possible combination of chemicals and on the impact on health and environment. And then the fourth priority under this pillar is to make sure that we address adequately in legislation the environmental impact, and we take into account of the environmental risk when we assess the risks of chemicals in legislation, which is for the moment more fit for assessing the impact on health. And two core actions, let's say, or which we will do in order to regulate on those issues is to introduce new hazard classes. This will be done under the CLP regulation, and in particular to include endocrine disruptors, but also persistent substances. And the other very important concept is that of essential uses. So we have announced that we want to avoid what are listed as the most harmful chemicals in consumer products, where their uses is not essential to society. On this, I can come back if there is an interest, but is on the one hand a way to ensure that the derogations will be possible, but also if the essential use of the substances in the product is proven, and if there are no alternatives, and this will allow us in particular to benefit of the chemicals, even the most harmful chemicals that we need in particular for the climate neutral technology or for other health reasons, anyway, for societal purposes. So it should be a way to accelerate the way we regulate on chemicals, and also a way to ensure that derogations are in line with this overall vision that we are setting in the strategy. The third pillar is simplification and consolidation of our legislation. And I'm not sure you can see very well this image of a temple, and this is what we have called a one substance, one assessment process. So this announcement that we will start a process in particular to improve the coordination and the transparency of the way we assess chemicals. We do hazard and risk assessments on chemicals. As I already said, those safety assessments in Europe are dealt with across different types of legislation. So we have horizontal legislation, but we have also product legislation. And in some cases, we may end up with the contradictory or at least apparently contradictory assessments. And in any case, we need to simplify the way that those assessments are done across legislation, and we need to ensure that those are fully transparent and provide predictability to all actors, also in terms of methodologies and sharing of data. So those are all actions which have been announced under this one substance, one assessment process, which will be actually a kind of a long journey. So it will start now, but as you can imagine, and most probably you have the best expertise in this sense, those processes will take a number of years in order to achieve a coherence of the way we assess and regulate. We have announced in the strategy that we will revise REACH. So as I said, one of the cornerstones of our legislation, and in particular, one of the things we will look at is the way we do authorization and restriction processes under REACH. And we have also announced that we will move towards a zero tolerance approach for non-compliance. And this will also be in terms of stepping up the enforcement and market surveillance of our legislation. So even when we have legislation in place, we still have a lot of problems in terms of enforcement and compliance, and we want to make use of the current tools that we have, but also put in place new tools in order to promote and step up compliance. The fourth pillar is to step up the knowledge base on chemicals. And the first action is that we have announced we will establish a EU research and innovation agenda for chemicals. So for the moment, research and innovation funding for chemicals is high. Is not that chemicals are a low priority, but there has never been a strategic approach to the research and innovation agenda, and in a sense, the research part and the innovation part have been always a little bit disconnected and not always going in a clear and strategic direction. But as we now have a clear vision of where we want to go, we also want that this vision is fully reflected in the funding that we will give to research and innovation. And this agenda, I can tell already that we will be very much in line with what we will do in the safe and sustainable chemicals part, in the sustainable and in the safe and sustainable by design definition, because that will be the way we will drive this agenda forward. One other part that we will need to address specifically in the research funding is to promote innovative testing and risk assessment methods. As you know, we have, or you may know, we have a clear policy objective to move away from animal testing as much as possible. We have a directive in place. So this objective is still very important for us, and we want to promote not only innovative testing, but also the regulatory uptake. We have a number of actions to improve the knowledge on chemical properties and use. In particular, we revise legislation in order to require more information on certain polymers, but also on the overall environmental footprint of chemicals. So we have, in particular, very, very low information on the climate impact of chemicals, but also on other environmental impacts. We need to have more information on low volume chemicals, and we need to make sure to be able to identify, to have enough information to be able to identify specific hazard properties, in particular for carcinogenic substances. We are moving a lot ahead in terms of creating a system to track what we call substances of concern, especially in products and materials. And for this, we will also put in place a digital passport in order to track those substances. And last but not least, we have a number of actions to help us monitor the impact of chemicals on humans and the environment. The first is to promote as much as possible and to finance the research and innovation program on human and environmental biomonitoring, which has already given us very important results, and we need to make it sustainable. We have announced that we will have a EU early warning and action system in order to address emerging issues in regulation as fast as possible, but also to create a framework of indicators to assess the impact of chemicals on health and environment and the progress of our policies. Then the last pillar is, as I said, the global dimension, where we have announced that the EU will move and will push for ambitious strategic objectives and targets beyond 2020. So we have already passed that target where we were supposed to have sound management of chemicals and waste in place. We are definitely far from achieving this. We are now rediscussing those objectives and targets and internationally, and the EU will very much push for very ambitious targets. We need to promote the good tool that we have internationally, and one of the most precious, and this is probably of interest for you as well, is the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. We are very well aware that if we don't classify chemicals, we cannot assess and regulate them further. So this is really the first, the basic starting point in order to move towards sound management of chemicals in a country. We have announced that we want to avoid having double standards internationally. So the chemicals which are banned in the EU for placing on the market will also be banned for production and export, and we are currently discussing exactly what legislation to revise and how to do, but we have the political commitment here, and we will promote also internationally innovative assessment and innovative testing, also with the objective to move away from animal testing. And finally, we will promote cooperation for the sound management of chemicals internationally, also in third countries, in particular in Africa, but not only. The way we are going to do all these, so first of all, the strategy has been published with in the form of a communication, but we interestingly, I think for you, if you want to get a little bit deeper, we have an annex where we announce the key actions, but also the tentative timing. We don't announce all actions, but just for you to know that in total we have 85 actions announced through the strategy. We have also a number of staff working documents which give a lot more details on what we intend to do in terms of actions on endocrine disruptors and the justification for doing this, on mixtures, on PFAS, and also on REACH. So the last thing I just want to say is how we intend to involve stakeholders. And first of all, we will set up a high-level roundtable to connect with the key stakeholders from industry, science, and civil society, and to monitor basically together the progress on the strategy, but also to promote as much as possible the industrial transition to safe and sustainable chemicals. And then we will revise a number of pieces of legislation, as I have announced, and in these procedures we have clear guidelines guidelines on involving stakeholders, on gathering scientific information and expertise. So there is absolutely way to intervene in the processes which are starting now for the revision of legislation. So just in a last conclusive sentence, the chemical strategy is only the starting point. Now there is a lot of work ahead, and we need to do this in a very as a joint effort with all those who want to participate in this very ambitious transition. And there will be a way to be involved and to be a consultant and to be to give your say. So I would invite anybody who is interested to follow more this process and to get involved as much as you can. Thanks a lot for listening. I think I've been a little bit too long, so I apologize for this, but there is time for questions and answers.
Great. Thank you so much, Elena, for your presentation. And Pam, you should join us now. I'll let you start off, Pam, and we'll go from there. You need to unmute. Up in the control panel.
There we go. Nope, you're muted on my phone. So first, Elena, I just want to thank you. That was just a phenomenal presentation and such a vision that, you know, as Joel and I have talked and others of the founding of A4 and some of the collaborations and the broad reaching, you know, efforts that it's going to take, I can see those elements in this program that you've presented. And certainly as a person from industry, what I really, I think gets me excited about this is that we're defining some direction now and some standards for how we can approach really safe and sustainable by design, right? We kind of look at it as design for safety, and we're doing that kind of on a chemical by chemical, application by application need. So I think having that criteria from an industry perspective will be welcome, and it will help us take the next step in moving more towards implementing those types of strategies in our new product development. Also, the fact that you've highlighted the need to really collaborate and connect across the supply chain. That can be a challenge as a raw material developer, just from my perspective. And so having those elements incorporated in this strategy is going to be helpful, and I think it's going to help bring the industry along to where we need to be. So very excited about what you've outlined. So many elements, the harmonizing of one substance, one assessment would be, you know, welcomed in any way that industry can help in guiding those efforts. We are certainly on board, and as an A4 member, excited to see what's coming along. So very welcome information on my part, and again, thank you. Joel?
Yeah, I'll just say, you know, as I said at the beginning, this is big and bold, and obviously in any bold policy proclamation like a communication, the devil is always in the details, as you said, you know, defining what's essential uses, defining safe and sustainable, getting a variety of agencies across the European Union or Commission to work well together. That's just normal in government, right? Even within an agency, getting coordination. How has, I mean, I'll start off with a question here, because this is obviously, there's often some cynicism in the US about the Europeans like to talk a lot, but we do more. And so how is the Commission addressing that action orientation of not just doing a statement, a big bold statement, but then working across the Commission to actually make this happen in practice?
Well, I think by revising legislation, we will show that we are not only talking, but we are actually acting. So we realize that without a regulatory approach, you at least the way that Europe works, maybe in the US is different, and I wouldn't mind sharing your views, but we need clear regulatory objectives in order to move ahead with an agenda which is actually very positive, which is because it should be a win-win for all. It should really support front runners. It should support industry in the transition to safe and sustainable, and also gain competitive advantages. So we really believe it's a positive agenda, but at the same time, you need clear regulatory boundaries on what we need to do, and you need them also to give predictability to industry on what they should invest in. So I think the regulatory revision, which we are starting immediately. So we are now doing the internal validation processes, but we will soon publish our consultation roadmaps for REACH and CLP. So this should be public pretty soon. This shows that it's not only words, but also actions.
Good. We're getting a lot of questions. Remember, if you do have a question, please use the question and answer box on your control panel, or you can raise your hand. I saw there's some hands raised as well. I'm just going to ask a starting question and then go from there. There were several questions on the one substance, one assessment, particularly, as you know, there's been some concern raised that certain agencies' assessments are less protective of public health than others. And so how would that work with an assessment of a chemical, for example, that's used in multiple product categories, from a food contact material to a toy to a consumer product, and will the commission then look at most sensitive subpopulations or most critical uses? How would they sort of think about that?
This is exactly what we want to tackle, so that we avoid these apparent inconsistencies. So as you know better than me, when we assess a chemical, we basically reply to the questions that we pose. So it depends a lot on the context and the product where we are assessing the chemical. So the assessments that we had as results were not inconsistent in terms of the questions that were asked to them, but for the public and for the overall wide audience, those could appear inconsistent. So what we want to do is to make sure that from the start we have a way to coordinate on the initiation of those assessments. So we will create an expert group where the member states will be present. In Europe, those are the ones, those and the Commission are the ones that can initiate assessments. So we want to make sure that what we initiate across legislation is coordinated, so that if we have to look at a product, at a chemicals in various products and under different legislation, we actually ask the same questions, and then we don't get to different results. And that's the first part. But then, of course, we need also methodologies to be harmonized across agencies, and we need to make sure that we have an optimal use of our scientific agencies in order to carry out the assessment. So that's the other part of the story.
Yeah, so the data requirements are consistent across agencies. I've always, we've always discussed here in the States that when you're at the local level, it doesn't matter what the chemical is in, it's all chemicals, right? But when you get to these national levels, it just differs depending whether it's in food or, or consumer products or industrial applications. And from a scientific perspective, they're the same.
It really sounds like it's more of a chemical life cycle kind of approach, right? Really understanding that.
So Elena, another question's come up, and of course you know that that people are asking that how is the Commission moving forward in defining essential uses, and how will those criteria, which is obviously a sense of subject, be developed?
So first of all, the only legislation or legal piece where we have a definition of essential uses is the Montreal Protocol for the which regulates the International Convention, which regulates the depletion, the ozone depleting substances. So this is where we will start, and obviously it's a very limited sector compared to what we want to address here. But there is already a definition there, and it has already been applied and used in an international context. So the idea is to start from that. We had already an initial discussion on how to possibly define criteria and use them under REACH. So there was already a concept paper from the Commission, and we gathered some inputs from competent authorities and stakeholders on that. So now we are revising that, and we will be further. But the next stage is actually to start a discussion early enough, not only on how to apply it in REACH, but also across legislation, because obviously whatever we will define in REACH, we have implications for other legislation. And in the strategy, we announced very clearly that we want a concept which can be used across legislation and not only in REACH. So it's a very early stage, but we will also we are trying to finalize the framework for this discussion. So also what we will need in terms of consultation with stakeholders and studies, etc. Yeah, this is what I can say at the moment.
Great. Similar questions coming up about the process of who will be involved across the Commission in thinking through this safe and sustainable by design, the criteria, the funding, the application and policy. And then the secondary question is this seen as a more of an innovation support idea, or would it be applied as well in thinking about how ECHA regulates chemicals, or how the Commission regulates chemicals, I should say?
So on the question who is in the lead for this this part, it's really an cross-service goal. So we have set up a working group which involves actually a lot of DGs, but also the agencies, to work on the concept, but also to align it to the funding. So both the concept and the funding will be they will see for sure the DG in charge of research and innovation with a prominent role, but all the other services who are interested from the regulatory point of view and from the funding point of view are closely involved. So, and this this brings me to the second question. So we see actually two aspects in this concept. One is definitely to orient funding for research and innovation, and it will not be only the research and innovation funding, as you know, in terms of Horizon Europe, but we will also have a lot of funding coming through the recovery instruments, which are more in the hands of member states, and we are trying to make sure that their objectives are also aligned with the European-wide objectives. There is funding coming from the regional funds, which go more directly to the regions of Europe. There is funding coming from our environmental life program. So all this funding, the chemicals part, should be aligned with those objectives. But then we would like also to have this concept in line, or a support concept for regulatory decisions. And on this, there will be a number of legal proposals which are very interesting for this. And the first one should come this year. And this is what is called Sustainable Products Initiative. So if you are not aware of it, I very much push you to have a look at it. And it will try to enshrine much principles on what it actually means for a product to be sustainable. And the other one, which is very much linked to the concept, is the sustainable finance initiative where we are actually defining sustainability quite closer in the details of what the different environmental objectives mean and should be ensured when we talk about sustainable finance. So and there are others, but so there are a lot of legal proposals in the Commission which are actually trying to bundle all the sustainability principles and to define them quite as detailed as possible. And so for me, the chemical parts should be defined through this concept.
Great, thank you. There were a couple of questions on how the Commission is going to address mixtures, of whether a mixture assessment factor can really be derived scientifically, or is that a policy determination, and trying to get an idea of, learn more about how you're going to think about this, or is it just early stage at this point?
Actually, in the strategy, we announced that we will follow two routes. So one is to continue with what is being developed in the food sector for addressing mixtures, which is a very solid scientific methodology which has been developed by our agency which deals with food safety, EFSA. And this methodology is almost ready. They have been working on it, I think, over 10 years now, and they will apply it into the pesticides and biocide regulation to address mixtures in this field. Regarding the mixture assessment factor, that was considered to be the only option to address mixtures at the moment when we have horizontal pieces of legislation like REACH, which deal with all hazardous substances. So we have other assessment factors already integrated in REACH, so those are not new. And the discussion now is how many factors, what should be exactly the value, and on this the discussion is open and it will be included in the impact assessment and the studies which will accompany the revision of REACH.
Great, and I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to wrap up, but there were a couple of questions about how the new chemical strategy will affect other sectoral policies like the ROSE directive, but also the chemical strategy talks about chemicals regulation extending to professional users under REACH, and how it will address occupational exposures going beyond it. So basically this integration with other sectoral legislation and then how it's going to extend to professional users.
So on professional users, this is another of the things which will be part of the revision of REACH. The idea is to grant to professional users the same level of protection that is currently granted under REACH to consumers. So the idea is really to put them legally on the same level. And in particular to address the most the exposure to the what we have listed as most harmful substances. The second question was on the coherence with other pieces of legislation. Indeed, this is I would say this is a common thread in the strategy. So it was really an attempt to simplify and create coherence across the different pieces of legislation, also because the strategy is built on an evaluation that we have done of over 40 pieces of legislation together. So we have assessed really the interface between those. And the most relevant concept is for sure the one substance, one assessment process, because this will be a way to actually look at where the biggest inconsistencies are and how to solve them in practice. So we will start with the assessments of chemicals, but we will most probably end up also in the regulatory part and how and if there is need to basically address the inconsistencies there.
Fantastic. And I think the last question, and we might roll out another poll here to wrap up, but is you're talking to two communities of practice, one on alternatives assessment, one on toxicology, and how do you see the role of these two professional multidisciplinary groups in helping to support the commission moving forward on implementing the strategy?
Sorry, Joel, you were cut for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So how do you see the Society for Toxicology and the A4 as providing key input? These professional societies are providing key input, key tools, methods that help support your successful implementation of the strategy.
Yeah, as I said, I think there will be many occasions to integrate your expertise in our processes and ensure that the process on safe and sustainable chemicals is yeah, as I see, is one of the most interesting for you, and we are definitely trying to define the best framework to have full consultation and to gather all the experience, because we are fully aware that we need to build on what has already been done on that and the experience that has been gathered. So it's not something that we have announced in the strategy and where we're starting from scratch, not at all. We have been also in the strategy, we have been building on all the work that has been going on until now and on the concepts of chemistry and sustainable chemistry. So this is something where we need to continue work. So yeah, this is probably the first thing where I see the input, and then I see that I'm curious actually about the results from your poll. Yeah, the evaluating toxicology. Yeah, indeed. So for sure also we will have a lot of work to do to define the new hazard classes that we have announced. In particular, the first one will be endocrine disruptors, and this will be the definition and the criteria for endocrine disruptors will be a key also to regulate those across the legislation. So it's another very important piece of work. Yeah, I think I would stop here if I have addressed the question. Otherwise, please come back to me.
That's fantastic. And I'm going to pass to Pam, your turn to wrap us up, and just want to say thank you, Elena.
Yeah, I'd also like to say thank you, Elena, for a very engaging webinar here today. And we're going to bring this webinar to a close. Thanks to all the participants. Would certainly say that we're all going to be excited to see how the strategies continues to develop and be implemented. And just want to put a plug in to those of you on the phone who may not be members of the Association for the Advancement of Alternative Assessments or for the SOT specialty section, Sustainable Chemicals Through Contemporary Toxicology. Please consider joining. And I think we can see that we have lots of contributions to make as we go forward. So thank you again. And I know it's late your time, so we really appreciate that.
Thank you. It was really a great experience for me, and I'm really happy to continue the discussion. Thanks a lot. Thanks for setting this up.
Okay, so with that, we'll close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.